The Rosehill Felicet began, as these things often do, with a single entry in a ledger dated August 14, 1827, 3 lines, written in the slanted, careful hand of a man who believed himself to be recording history rather than horror. Subject: female. Height recorded at 6 feet, 8 inches. Weight unconfirmed. Purchased at auction, Charleston. Designation, Eleanor. The handwriting falters midway through that final name, as though the clerk's pen hesitated, uncertain whether a woman of such stature could rightfully possess one. What followed, of course, became legend. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Rosehill Plantation stood some 30 miles northwest of Charleston, bordered by the Santee River and an expanse of cypress swampland that the locals called the Drowned. The plantation belonged to Reverend Abel Vance, a man known in equal measure for his piety and his temper. Publicly, he was a respected figure, a minister of strict Calvinist discipline, whose sermons drew families from neighboring counties. Privately, those who labored under him spoke of his medical fascinations, his belief that divinely ordained hierarchies could be proven through the study of the body. Eleanor arrived at Rosehill in late August of 1826, purchased from an estate in Beaufort after her previous owner's death. She was described in sale records as a jauntess of uncommon frame and composure. At the time of her arrival, she would have been perhaps 23 years old. Though her exact age was uncertain, her parentage lost in the folds of older plantation ledgers, sold and resold until only a string of initials remained. Within weeks of her arrival, she was the subject of whispered fascination. Local doctors came to observe her stature. Traveling scholars asked to take her measurements. Reverend Vance himself recorded in his book of manifest design that she was a creature of remarkable symmetry, combining the strength of a man with the restraint of a woman, fashioned for labor by Providence itself. That line would later be quoted in court proceedings, long after his name had turned to infamy. In the early records, Eleanor appears only as a curiosity, a body measured, catalogued, and renamed. But as the winter of 1826 deepened into the spring of 1827, her presence began to mark the rhythms of Rosehill in more troubling ways. The overseer, Jonathan Peel, reported that the other enslaved workers refused to sleep near her. They said that Eleanor spoke in her sleep, not in words but in a low humming that shook the floorboards, a tune without melody, without end. They said she would stand at the edge of the fields at dawn, eyes unfocused, as if waiting for something that the morning light refused to reveal. Reverend Vance took these reports as divine signs, and his letters preserved today in the Charleston Historical Society. He wrote that Eleanor's body was a text of mystery, a vessel containing both punishment and proof. He began inviting other men of learning to his study to discuss her case, to measure her limbs, to record the strange whiteness of her eyes in candlelight. Among these visitors was Dr. Isaac Morton, a physician of modest reputation who would later describe the experiments at Rosehill of a nature both anatomical and spiritual. Morton's notes, discovered in 1873 behind a false wall in his family home, provide our clearest picture of what was done in that library. Subject placed upon wooden platform for observation, pulse steady, pupils unreactive to lamp, stature exceeds ordinary female proportion by 2 feet, limbs thick and well formed. Rever and insist she is proof of antediluvian bloodlines descended, he says, from the sons of the Nephilim. That passage, dismissed by early historians as superstition, has since been re-evaluated as a window into the pseudo-scientific theology that thrived among Southern elites of the era, the blending of scripture and science to justify domination. The events of that night, the night of August 14, 1827, were foreshadowed in small ways. In the week prior, the plantation nurse, Ruth Ansell, reported that Eleanor's infant child, Jacob, had been taken from her by Reverend Vance himself. The child, only 8 months old, was sold to a trader bound for Savannah. The reasons were financial. On paper, Rosehill was struggling after a poor harvest, but those close to the family whispered that Abel Vance had grown disturbed by the boy's size and pallor. He claimed the child's eyes reflected moonlight where there was none. After Jacob's sale, Eleanor refused to eat. She worked in silence, her great hands trembling as she labored in the fields. By night she wandered near the river, staring into the dark current that carried the scent of salt and rot. Jonathan Peale recorded that she began carving figures into the wood of her cabin, small horses, crude and childlike, dozens of them arranged in a line across her sleeping mat. When asked about them, she said only, "He'll find them when he returns." The final entry in Reverend Vance's journal reads simply, August 14th, storm approaching. The woman has been confined to quarters. Behavior erratic. Prayer is necessary. That night, lightning struck the northern barn. In the confusion, Eleanor escaped her confinement. What happened in the hours that followed has been reconstructed from witness statements, coroner reports, and the testimony of Dr. Morton himself. Shortly before midnight, screams were heard from the Reverend's library. When Jonathan Peale forced open the door, he found the room in chaos, bookshelves overturned, oil lamps shattered, and Abel Vance lying on the floor with his skull crushed as if by a hammer. The window pane was shattered outward. Rain blew through the opening, soaking the pages of the Reverend's open ledger. In the margin beside the entry for Eleanor, someone, likely Vance himself, had written a single unfinished phrase: "She is not of this war." In the weeks that followed, Rosehill descended into silence. Authorities scoured the nearby woods. Blood was found near the river bank, but no body. Dogs lost her scent where the land sank into the marsh. Rumors spread quickly through Charleston and beyond that a monstrous woman roamed the forests, that she could crush a man's skull with her bare hands, that she was neither alive nor dead, but something in between. The official report filed by Magistrate Hugh Leverett listed her as missing, presumed deceased, but the documents themselves tell another story. In the low corner of the coroner's page, barely visible beneath the embossed seal, someone wrote in faded ink, "Seen near Monk's Corner, carrying something in her arms." If that note is genuine, then Eleanor may have survived her wound, carrying into the swamps not vengeance but grief. Testimonies from the drowned would for decades. No one spoke of what had happened at Rosehill. The remaining workers were sold off, the land went fallow, and the Reverend's widow Margaret Vance moved north to live with her sister in Georgetown. But among the freed and the displaced, stories persisted. Some said they heard her still, walking the river's edge at dusk. Others claimed to have seen her shadow cross the flooded rice fields, long and wavering, as though she were still searching for something. The earliest official mention after the tragedy appears in an 1831 deposition by Deputy Marshal Thaddeus Cole, who was tasked with cataloging runaway or fugitive Negroes believed to be associated with violent incidents. The file, marked confidential, Charleston District, included a rough pencil sketch labeled simply, "Tall female, barefoot, head bound in cloth, carries bundle." Cole's testimony, though brief, carries a quiet unease. The swampland between the river forks is unlike any terrain I have known. The air carries a sound like breathing that is not wind. My men grew uneasy near the drowned trees. One swore he saw a figure wading through the shallows. When I called out, it turned its head slowly, as if uncertain of the noise. We retreated before nightfall. The figure did not follow. Cole would later abandon the search altogether, citing malaria-like symptoms and nervous complaint. He died in 1832 of what his physician called exhaustion of the heart. The accompanying note reads, "Patient raves in sleep of the tall woman, the marsh woman, says her eyes glow white." By the late 1830s, Rosehill was sold at auction to Dr. Horace Llewellyn, a man known in Charleston's medical circle for his work on hereditary aberrations. It was Llewellyn who first proposed that the Vance family's obsessions might be preserved through their papers, if only someone had the will to study them properly. He moved into the abandoned plantation house in 1839 with 2 assistants and began cataloging what remained. The Reverend's journals, half rotted from humidity, were found sealed in a cedar chest. The ledgers, anatomical diagrams, and biblical annotations were meticulously transcribed by candlelight. Llewellyn's notes from October 9, 1839 read, "Signs of intrusion near the old chapel. Footprints in soft soil bare, elongated, as though the heel had never learned to strike the earth properly. Impossible that they belong to any living man or woman of this district. They vanish at the edge of the bog." 2 weeks later, his assistant, Charles Pratt, recorded an event of particular interest. "During the storm last evening, we heard 3 knocks upon the door slow, deliberate, like knuckles against wet wood. The doctor forbade us to answer. At dawn, I found the door marked with handprints large, long-fingered, pressed deep into the paint as though the wood itself had softened beneath them. These findings were quietly submitted to the Charleston Medical College under the heading, Phenomena Associated with Post-Mortem Height Retention." Llewellyn hypothesized that extreme stature might be accompanied by persistent muscular reflex, though no physical body was ever recovered. To support his claim, local folklore soon filled the gap science refused to touch. Children along the Santee whispered of Ellen of the Marsh, a woman who could stretch her arms across the river and pluck her child from any home. Fishermen claimed she appeared to them in fog, offering silver trinkets in exchange for names, always names of infants. By 1841, the stories had grown so persistent that the Charleston Courier published an editorial dismissing the legend as superstition among the colored population. Yet, in the same issue, a notice appeared beneath the classifieds, "Missing 2 boys, aged 7 and 9. Last seen near the river road at Rosehill Crossing. Tracks end at the water line." It was not until 1843 that a more substantial record surfaced, found in the private correspondences of Dr. Llewellyn himself. The letter, addressed to his colleague Professor James Turnbull, was never mailed. It was discovered in 1890, folded into the back of a hymnal. It reads in part, "Turnbull, I confess my thoughts have grown unsteady since our work began. I hear footsteps upon the stairs when no one ascends. There is a sound beneath the floor, as if something vast breathes through the foundation. At night I see her silhouette upon the far edge of the fields, motionless, watching. I measured the print again this morning, 13 inches from heel to toe. Too precise, too symmetrical. I have begun to wonder if she has ceased to be entirely human." After this, Llewellyn's notes grow increasingly erratic, paragraphs breaking into prayers, medical terminology colliding with scripture. By 1845, he was admitted to the Charleston Sanatorium for deterioration of mind and moral clarity. He died there 3 months later. His final words recorded by a nurse: "She never sleeps. The marsh keeps her." In 1850, the Rosehill property changed hands once again, purchased by the Whitlock family, who converted what remained of the main house into a rice mill. The workers refused to stay after dusk. One account from that period, written by overseer Samuel Rains, survives in fragments. "The night fog gathers thickest by the river path. I have heard something like weeping from the reeds low and hollow. Found one of the boys this morning babbling that he saw a woman standing knee-deep in the water, holding a bundle. He said she was taller than the trees." Rains reported the sighting to local authorities, but no action was taken. He left Rosehill within the month, leaving behind only a single cryptic note in his ledger: "There are tracks in the clay too large for any man. They lead back toward the chapel." By the 1860s, the Civil War would sweep away what little remained of the plantation's original holdings. The chapel burned. The mill collapsed. But even as the land changed hands, the legend endured. Freedmen settling nearby spoke of finding carved wooden horses along the riverbank, tiny, crude, soaked through with mud. Some believed they were offerings. Others said they were warnings. A missionary named Sister Agnes Wilder, writing in 1872, described her own encounter while tending to the sick in the area. "The air is heavy with the smell of moss and stagnant water. I awoke one night to find a woman standing outside the tent flap. She said nothing. Her eyes seemed clouded, as if filled with water. When I blinked, she was gone, but the ground bore her print deep, unmistakable. I cannot speak of the fear it gave me, only that it felt ancient, as though the earth itself recognized her." By the turn of the century, Rosehill had vanished beneath the river's expansion, the last of its stones swallowed by mud. Only the name endured, carried in whispers: Eleanor Vance, the tall woman of Rosehill. The old people said she could not cross running water. The young ones dared each other to shout her name into the cypress fog. And every so often, every few decades, a report would surface: a figure glimpsed in the mist, a child gone missing near the banks, a faint humming carried on the wind, and always, always that same uneasy refrain among those who claimed to have seen her: she was looking for someone. The Anatomist's Ledger, B. 1889. Rosehill had been little more than a memory, its fields long reclaimed by the Santee River and its name relegated to old county maps. Yet the legend of Eleanor Vance found new life in a different context, one not of sermons or superstition, but of science. That autumn, the Charleston Medical College received a bequest from the estate of Dr. Josiah Harrow, a retired anatomist and lecturer on comparative physiology. Among his effects was an oilskin folder labeled Specimen H. Rosehill. Inside were sketches, partial autopsy diagrams, and a set of notes written in a slanting, feverish hand. The handwriting, later confirmed by scholars, matched that of Harrow himself. Acquired fragment of os femoris. Length 28 inches. Curvature minimal. Density anomalous. Surface displays striations consistent with post-mortem water exposure. Source attributed by collector to the Santee Basin. Locality unknown. The ratio of limb to body scale suggests female, height exceeding 6 1/2 feet. The folder also contained a faded photograph, a crude, early wet plate image showing what appeared to be a bone fragment resting across a measuring rod. Behind it stood a man in clerical dress, unnamed, and smiling, his face blurred by the exposure. Across the back, in faint ink, EV verified. In the following months, Harrow's research notes grew obsessive. He began to speculate that the fragment did not merely belong to the body of Eleanor Vance, but represented evidence of a distinct hereditary line, a recessive gigantism peculiar to the coastal Carolinas. He believed that the aberration had spiritual, as well as biological roots, perhaps the result of ancestral sin or divine intervention, misunderstood by modern man. His students described him as a man divided between faith and anatomy. During his lectures, he would hold up the sketch of the bone and whisper, "This is what Scripture feared." One of those students, Miss Lydia Parks, preserved her recollections in a journal discovered decades later. He would stare at that drawing as if waiting for it to move. Said the woman was not wicked, only misplaced, a creature too tall for this world, he called her. Once, when a thunderstorm broke over the city, he ordered us to shutter every window, saying she walked when the air trembled. On this same time, rumors began to circulate among fishermen working the inland channels. They spoke of lights beneath the water pale, wandering, as if someone were carrying a lantern far below the surface. A boy from the township of Jamestown vanished after venturing too near the flooded ruins of Rosehill. When they found his boat, it was upright, his lantern still burning, the water round it rippling though there was no wind. The local constable dismissed the incident as drowning by carelessness, but within the community, older voices recalled the story of Eleanor and her lost child. They said she had come back for what was taken from her. Even now, fragments of that belief survive in Goliath's son near the river mouth. Tall woman walk the river bend. She call your name, she call again. Give her back her little one, or she will take your breath, my son. In the spring of 1890, Dr. Harrow vanished. His housekeeper reported that he had gone out before dawn, carrying a lantern and a wrapped parcel about the size of a child's skull. He never returned. Days later, police found his boots on the bank of the Santee. The mud bore deep impressions, long, narrow, as if another set of footprints had stood beside his. No body was recovered. When the estate was finally inventoried, the folder marked specimen H was missing. Only one entry remained in his final notebook, dated the night before his disappearance. The marsh is not silent. Beneath its skin is a pulse. I think she waits for me to understand. By the turn of the 20th century, the legend had entered the realm of folklore, and cautionary tale. Touring lecturers invoked Eleanor's name in sermons on moral decay. Dime novel writers adapted her into melodrama. The Charleston Gazette published a serialized account titled The Jauntus of the Santee, describing her as a ghost who pulled the wicked into the mud. But among archivists and historians, quieter discoveries suggested that something far stranger persisted beneath the myth. In 1903, a surveyor mapping new canal routes near the old plantation recorded finding a stone foundation of curious alignment, forming a perfect cross though the original chapel stood elsewhere. In the center lay a depression filled with water, and at its bottom, a circle of wooden toys, miniature horses, all facing outward. The surveyor's logbook includes a sketch of the site, now held in the county archives. Each horse is drawn with a carved mark on its flank, a small inverted triangle, identical to the one found etched on Reverend Vance's own study desk decades earlier. Around the same period, a letter from Reverend Thomas Fairburn, a missionary working among coastal freedmen, reached the diocesan office in Charleston. The people here cling to their stories. They warn me not to walk the river road at dusk. One woman, old beyond measure, says she has seen the tall mother thrice in her life, first as a child, again as a wife, and most recently last winter, when the floodwaters rose. She says the woman carried a bundle wrapped in reeds and sang a tune without words. I told her such visions are the devil's deception. She only smiled and said, "Then the devil keep her gentle, for she done lost more than heaven ever gave her." Fairburn's tone, at first skeptical, turns and settled near the end of the letter. Last night I heard the same humming beyond my window. The dogs refused to bark. I prayed until dawn but cannot shake the feeling that prayer here goes unheard. In 1911, during the construction of the St. Helena levee, workers unearthed what was described in official records as human remains of abnormal proportion. The bones were long, the skull elongated, the jaw unusually broad. Authorities sent the find to the state medical examiner, who filed it under unclassified female, possibly historical. The remains were later transferred to the Medical College of Charleston, where they vanished during an inventory fire in 1914. That same year, a janitor named Elias Corder submitted a written complaint to the college board claiming that someone had been walking the basement corridors after hours, leaving wet footprints across the tiled floor. His report was dismissed. Corder's own testimony ends with a line that feels almost like confession. I know what I seen. The water come up from nowhere, and in it was her reflection. She look at me like she remember my name. By 1920, Rose Hill itself had ceased to exist as a geographical location. The river's path shifted again, and the last markers of the plantation were swallowed whole. Yet the archive of reports, the letters, testimonies, diagrams, and sketches continued to surface sporadically. Like bones dredged from the deep, historians argue about what they prove, whether Eleanor Vance was merely a woman of unusual height, a victim of cruelty and myth-making, or something less definable, an inheritance of grief that refused to die. But those who have handled the papers often remark upon a single, inexplicable detail: the faint smell of river water that clings to them even after centuries, and the way the ink on certain pages will not fade. There are things that survive their names, wrote one archivist. Eleanor is one of them. The witnesses of water when the Medical College fire of 1914 consumed Dr. Harrow's archives. The official explanation labeled it electrical failure. Yet the city's insurance report, filed 2 weeks later, contained an unprinted appendix. The night watchman, Henry Beckett, swore he had heard singing before the flames began, low, rhythmic, like somebody praying in the old town. He described the corridor lights dimming in sequence, as if a tide of darkness rolled down the hall. Moments later, the jars in the anatomy theater burst one by one, releasing the smell of brine and formaldehyde. The fire that followed left nothing but warped glass and blackened bone. Beckett's statement was never published. He disappeared 3 days afterward, his raincoat found on the wharf behind East Bay Street, still damp though no rain had fallen that night. In 1916, the Charleston Courier ran a brief item under the heading "Skeleton Hand Found in Flood Debris." Fishermen dragging nets near the remains of Rose Hill Bridge had hauled up a length of arm bone ending in an oversized hand, female, by the expert's account, but with knuckles like walnut shells. The specimen was sent to the county coroner and then vanished from record. One of the examining physicians, Dr. Arthur Lang, wrote privately to a colleague in Savannah, "I've handled bones my whole life, but this one felt alive, the surface slick as if it perspired. When the lantern swung, it looked as though the joints flexed. I tell myself it was imagination, yet I have wrapped the thing in linen and cannot sleep knowing it rests beneath my own roof." He mailed the letter on October 3rd. On October 6th his house caught fire. His body was found beside his desk, hand outstretched toward the locked cabinet where he had stored the bone. The fire had burned only that single room. By the 1920s, the Vance legend had become the subject of graduate theses and spiritualist seances alike. A folklorist from Columbia University, Miriam Hensley, traveled through the Carolinas collecting oral histories. Her field journals survive, brittle and water-stained, in the Southern Folklife collection. Entry number 47 reads, "Old woman at Pine Hill Settlement tells me the tall mother walks when the moon swells. Says she calls to those who lost kin in the river. When I asked her name, the woman spat into the dirt and said, 'Name don't matter. She remember for us all.'" Entry number 48, written 2 nights later. "Heard movement outside my tent. Sounded like cloth dragging through reeds. Thought it an animal, until I smelled the air sweet rot, like lilies left too long in water. Found prints in the mud at dawn. Too long, too narrow. One pressed deep enough to fill with water as I watched." Hensley returned north the next spring and published Songs from the Santee Basin 1925. The final chapter excised by her editor was titled "The Woman Who Would Not Drown." In it, she argued that Eleanor Vance had become a mythic composite of maternal vengeance and spiritual persistence, a figure who embodies the river's refusal to forget. Only the typeset proof survives, bound in a personal notebook found after her death in 1942, across the margin. In Hensley's own pen, she touched the tent flap. During the Great Flood of 1928, much of Lower Charleston was underwater. Relief workers from the Red Cross station near Goose Creek recorded hearing female voices singing in harmony though none were present. One worker, Corporal James T. Rowe, later wrote to his wife, "There's a sound the water makes when it moves against brick, like breathing. Some nights I swear the current has a pulse. Last evening I saw something upright in it, a figure as tall as the doorway, hair spread like weeds. When I lit the flare it was gone, but the water still rippled in the shape of shoulders. The letter was never delivered. It was recovered years later from a chest of unsent mail stored in the city archives. The envelope sealed, but the paper inside damp and faintly stained with silt. In 1933, a Works Progress Administration crew draining part of the Santee Basin uncovered the remnants of a foundation. Beneath layers of clay lay fragments of stained glass, emerald, amber, and blood red arranged in a crude spiral. A supervising engineer noted an impression in the clay resembling a human body, far larger than average, arms outspread. When photographed, the imprint faded within hours, leaving only smooth earth. That same week, 2 laborers drowned in 3 feet of standing water. Witnesses reported they had stumbled suddenly as though seized by the ankles. The site was closed and filled in. The legend's resurgence coincided with the slow professionalization of folklore studies. In 1939, historian Evelyn Shaw presented a paper before the American Historical Association titled "Myth and Memory in the Reconstruction South." She devoted 10 pages to the Vance account, proposing that Eleanor's story persisted because history abhors unresolved guilt. Shaw concluded, "The tall mother is not vengeance but conscience, our own reflection, walking back to meet us." That line earned polite applause. Yet the following morning she was found unconscious in her hotel room, having suffered a severe allergic reaction. She survived but never lectured again. In her diary afterward she wrote only, "The water followed me to the 4th floor." War and modernization buried much of the region's folklore beneath concrete and industry. By the 1950s the Santee had been dammed, its old channels drowned beneath Lake Marion. Yet fishermen still told stories of a woman walking on the lakebed when the moon is thin. In 1956, a diver conducting maintenance on the dam reported seeing a structure like a chapel without walls on the silt below, timbers forming a cross, ringed with small wooden carvings. His supervisor dismissed it as driftwood, but the diver, a man named E. Monroe Fitch, resigned the following week. In his resignation letter he wrote, "There was light down there, not reflected, not from above, coming from inside the mud. I saw hands moving in it, slow, like waving grass. One of them had 6 fingers. Archival consistency falters after mid-century. The paper trail dissolves into rumor, oral history, and marginalia scribbled notes on microfilm boxes, annotations in library ledgers. But the pattern remains: floods, disappearances, and the recurring description of a woman impossibly tall. Her eyes pale as STORMLIGHT. One of the last verifiable entries comes from 1964. A custodian at the newly opened Charleston Museum of History reported a leak in the basement archives. When staff investigated, they found the floor slick with river water, though no pipe had burst. Floating in the center of the room was a single artifact from the old Rosehill collection, a child's wooden horse, its paint intact, its flank carved with an inverted triangle. They dried it, catalogued it, and placed it in a sealed display case. Visitors say that on humid days the glass fogs from within. By century's end, the official record of Eleanor Vance concluded where it had begun in uncertainty. Historians declared the story folklore. Theologians called it parable. Yet along the Santee, people still leave offerings, ribbons tied to cypress roots, tiny toys wrapped in cloth. Those who live near the water tell of a presence that comes when the air thickens and the current slows. They do not call her ghost, nor saint. They call her simply the tall mother, the one who remembers what the world would rather forget if she ever stops walking. An elder told an interviewer in 1991, "The river gone stop too. She keep it moving, so it don't turn rotten like men do." The drowned archive. By the early 1970s, the name Eleanor Vance had become a kind of password whispered among graduate students in Southern folklore, a test of nerve and obsession. Her story flickered, and photocopied articles, mimeograph syllabi, and anonymous submissions to Folklore Quarterly. The academics spoke of her with the same reverence they reserved for missing data, something that might change everything if it could only be found again. A pattern emerged. Every 10 years or so, someone tried to write her definitive biography. Every attempt ended the same way: incomplete manuscripts, sudden resignations, or the author's descent into silence. One of the earliest cases was Professor Robert A. McKinnon, of the University of South Carolina, who announced in 1970 to a forthcoming monograph titled The Persistence of the Vance Mythos. He appeared on a local radio program to promote it, calm and confident, reciting lines from memory. "What we call ghosts are not the dead, but the guilt of the living given form. The river remembers, and through it she walks." 2 weeks later, McKinnon vanished en route to a lecture in Savannah. His car was found parked beside the Santee River Bridge, the engine still warm, the passenger seat damp. Inside the glove compartment, police found a cassette labeled Field Notes, EV. The tape contains 31 minutes of rushing water, distant humming, and at the very end, a single female voice saying almost kindly, "I'm not gone." In 1975, an artist named Lucille Garnett exhibited a series of oil paintings at the Charleston Historical Society under the collective title The River's Memory. The canvases depicted a woman of extraordinary height wading through flooded streets, her face half submerged, eyes open and blinking. Viewers described the paintings as beautifully wrong. The light in them didn't obey the laws of perspective. It seemed to rise from below. On the opening night, a local historian recognized the figure as matching 19th century sketches of Eleanor Vance. When he confronted Garnett, she appeared startled and claimed she had never heard the name. "I just paint what I dream," she said. Within a month, The artist's studio was destroyed in a sudden flood caused by a burst water main, the only building in the district to sustain damage. Goliath moved inland afterward and never painted again. By the 1980s, the Vance legend had migrated beyond folklore journals and into the occult underground. Xeroxed pamphlets circulated through college dormitories and second-hand bookstores, claiming that Eleanor was not dead but bound to the current, a sentient echo of injustice feeding on memory. One pamphlet, attributed to the anonymous Order of the River, described her as the archivist of the forgotten, and claimed that those who spoke her name near still water could hear the low breath of cataloging. The group's ritual involved placing personal items, photographs, letters, small bones into a bowl of water, and whispering their own name backward 3 times. The ritual was said to grant remembering, a flood of ancestral memory that often left participants delirious. Police records from 1983 list 4 cases of accidental drowning near the Santee, each involving members of a local folklore club calling themselves the Drowned Scholars. The last entry, dated August 12, reads, "All 4 victims found kneeling in the shallows, faces turned toward the tide. No sign of struggle. River calm. Eyes open." The story's transformation into urban legend accelerated with the spread of home media. In 1987, a VHS documentary titled Eleanor Vance, the Tall Mother of Charleston, aired late night on public television. Produced on a shoestring budget by an amateur historian named Peter Rowland, it combined interviews, reenactments, and grainy footage of the flooded Santee Basin. The broadcast drew little attention until 2 weeks later, when viewers began reporting strange interference. Recordings of the program, when replayed, featured faint weeping on the audio track, synchronized with scenes showing the river. Rowland himself dismissed it as magnetic tape distortion, but during a follow-up broadcast, he suffered a mild stroke live on air, slumping forward as the screen flickered and cut to static. The footage never aired. When technicians reviewed the master reel, they discovered faint discoloration, dark streaks moving against the flow of the film, like water trying to climb upward. In 1992, the Charleston Museum hosted an exhibit titled Echoes of the Basin, curated by historian and archivist Dr. Alice Copeland. Her purpose was to separate fact from folklore, to present the real Eleanor Vance through authenticated documents. Visitors entered through a narrow corridor lined with glass cases displaying fragments, charred letters, rusted shackles, waterlogged pages. At the exhibit center stood a reconstructed model of the Rosehill Plantation Chapel, built to scale. The air conditioning failed on opening night, and humidity gathered visibly in the glass displays. Some attendees claimed to see condensation form the shape of a woman's hand pressed against the case containing the chapel's foundation stones. Copeland dismissed the rumors until she reviewed security footage. The camera trained on the central display glitched precisely at midnight, distorting the image into a smear of pale light that extended across 3 frames approximately 2 seconds. When slowed down, the figure appeared upright, taller than human scale. Dr. Copeland resigned within a month. Her replacement reported that she had sent him a single envelope marked private. Inside was a note written in hurried script. The water came from inside the stones. By the late 1990s, Eleanor Vance had become shorthand for collective guilt, appearing in psychology lectures and Southern Gothic literature alike. Some claimed she was a metaphor for America's unresolved sins. Others insisted she was really an ongoing phenomenon like weather or hunger. In 1998, a graduate student named Mary Candler published a paper titled Hauntology of the River, the Tall Mother, as memory device. Her thesis proposed that Eleanor Vance was not a ghost but an archive that walks. The paper earned her brief notoriety and an invitation to speak at a symposium in New Orleans. She never arrived. Her rental car was discovered abandoned near Lake Marion, keys still in the ignition, headlights pointing toward the water. In the back seat was a single open notebook, its pages soaked but legible. The final line read, "I saw her reflection in the water, but she was standing behind me." When the millennium turned, the story should have drowned under the weight of modernity, yet it persisted. The internet gave her new life. Digital forums and message boards began trading stories of the Tall Mother glitch. Webcams near rivers flickering at 3:07 a.m. Water level sensors transmitting phantom spikes, and users reporting strange dreams after watching the footage. Someone uploaded McKinnon's lost cassette recording, the one found in his glove compartment. It circulated under the title Eleanor Vance _real. WAV, and the background hum of the tape. Audio analysts detected rhythmic pulses matching human heartbeat patterns. A YouTube commenter wrote beneath it, "I played it by the river. The current slowed down like it was listening." By the time the 21st century dawned, the name Eleanor Vance no longer belonged to history, or even to legend. She had become infrastructure, her myth woven into the data streams, the documentaries, the memes, the half-remembered whispers of academia. But still, in the towns along the old Santee Basin, people hang white cloth from their porches when a storm comes. They say it's a sign of respect. They say it keeps the water from rising too high. And when asked if they believe she's real, the elders always answer the same way: real enough to come if you call. The algorithm that dreamed of water after 2001, the legend of Eleanor Vance drifted quietly into the circuitry of the internet, her name less a haunting than a hashtag. The forums were gone, replaced by early blogging sites where anonymous users uploaded blurry screenshots of rivers, glitches in webcam feeds, and most chillingly images of tall, elongated silhouettes reflected where no one was standing. The first major incident occurred in 2003, when a server technician named Eric Donnelly at the South Carolina Department of Environmental Control noticed something strange in the hydrological data. Sensors along the Santee Basin were transmitting hourly readings, water levels, temperature, salinity, but for 3 consecutive nights. Every sensor reported the same error code, E.V.001. There was no such code in the system. The log showed something else too. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the sensors briefly spiked to readings consistent with human heartbeat, 72 beats per minute, then normalized, as though nothing had happened. Donnelly, believing it a hardware fault, rebooted the relay remotely. The error returned the next night, and then the next. He filed an internal report under the title Phantom Algorithm EV Glitch. His supervisor dismissed it as coincidence, until the technician's badge was found 2 weeks later floating near the diversion canal. No body was recovered. His final login attempt, timestamped 3 hours 7 minutes and 12 seconds, accessed a folder named Eleanor_Vance _reconstruct, a folder that had never existed before. Between 2004 and 2008, the Vance myth was quietly reclassified by online researchers as a meme entity, a digital folklore pattern evolving through retellings. On early Reddit threads and paranormal wikis, users traded screenshots of strange Wikipedia edit sentences rewritten overnight, citations that led nowhere, pages that reformatted themselves when reopened. A recurring edit appeared on the Charleston history page. Eleanor Vance, tall mother of the basin, returned to collect her drowned. Moderators reverted it dozens of times. The next morning, It reappeared again, timestamped 3:07 a.m. Some users began experimenting, mentioning her name in blog tags, embedding her initials into image metadata. They reported seeing their uploads distort, brightening unnaturally around the edges, as though backlit from beneath the screen. A handful of programmers attempted to track the edit's origin through IP addresses, all traced back to government subnets near Columbia, South Carolina, unreachable without clearance. One of those programmers, a systems engineer known only by his handle Nailhouse, wrote in a private forum, "She's not a ghost. She's a checksum error in the national conscience." 2 days later, his account vanished. The administrator noted that his deletion logs were marked with a single word, water. The next phase of the haunting came through audio. In 2010, a file surfaced on 4chan's X board titled Eleanor_deep.wav. Listeners described an oppressive sound like subaqueous humming mixed with distant human breathing. The waveform, when rendered visually, formed an irregular pattern resembling a human silhouette, elongated vertically. Audio analysts determined the frequencies matched underwater acoustic data collected by NOAA buoys along the Atlantic coast. The file was precisely 3 minutes and 7 seconds long. Comments under the upload began to multiply. "I played it in the bath. The drain started pulsing. If you loop it, it syncs with your heartbeat. She's learning our frequency." By 2011, the file had over 1 million reuploads, each slightly different. The pitch drifted lower. The hum grew more articulate, until one version appeared to whisper a name, not Eleanor, but listener. Meanwhile, in academia, the story reemerged as an intellectual puzzle. At Tulane University, a doctoral candidate named Henry Valence proposed a dissertation titled "The Hydrological Haunting: Myth as Environmental Feedback." His hypothesis was simple but unsettling, that folklore, like water, carries memory through repetition. When a story floods the mind long enough, he wrote, it begins to erode the barrier between myth and matter. During his fieldwork in the old basin towns, Valence recorded interviews with locals who remembered the white cloth tradition. One woman told him, "We hang them when we hear her walking. The air changes, heavy like breath on glass." He documented 15 such testimonies before disappearing. In the winter of 2012, his voice recorder was found near the shore. The final 3 minutes were unintelligible except for a faint whisper repeating his name. The timestamp, 3:07 to 3:10 in 2014, government attention quietly resurfaced. Leaked memos from the U.S. Geological Survey's internal anomalous hydrodynamics division referenced pattern EV Santi. The reports described repeated sensor interference correlating with regional folklore about a tall female presence associated with water memory. One redacted paragraph mentioned digital infiltration via environmental monitoring. Another, acoustic resonance, resembling female speech detected in river telemetry signals. When journalists filed FOIA requests for these documents, the agency denied their existence. Yet, screenshots circulated across conspiracy forums. In one image, blurred but legible, a line of text read, "Containment not possible. Entity distributed across all stored water." That phrase, stored water, became a rallying cry online, sparking hashtags, art, music. Users began filming themselves whispering "Eleanor, remember me" into sinks, puddles, lakes, uploading the clips at exactly 3:07 a.m. They called it the Reflection Challenge. 2 participants reportedly drowned while filming near the Santee. Both phones were recovered, still recording. Each contained 3 minutes of static followed by faint weeping and a woman's voice saying, "You called, By 2018, Eleanor Vance was no longer a ghost story. She was a data anomaly, an aesthetic, a brand of dread. Artists used her name as metaphor for digital grief. Musicians sampled her hum in ambient albums. A startup even released an R-Up-Tall Mother.exe- that used phone microphones to detect paranormal audio patterns. Within weeks, the app was pulled from stores. Users complained it wouldn't uninstall. Some reported hearing dripping sounds through their earbuds when no water was nearby. The company dissolved, its servers purged, but copies of the APK persisted on the darknet. A cracked version circulated under the name Vance 307 app. Users claimed it generated hallucinations when run near rivers. The app's permissions, examined later, showed it required constant microphone access even when closed. Cybersecurity experts traced its code to an unregistered domain linked to the University of South Carolina's Department of Folklore Study. When investigators reached out, the listed professor denied ever supervising such a project. His resignation letter, however, ended with a single line: "She's using us to dream." Now, in the present decade, Eleanor Vance exists in the margins of technology like a watermark. Search engines suppress her name. Queries redirect to irrelevant results. Yet once every few months, her pattern resurfaces: an unexplained network outage, a data spike in hydrological systems, an anonymous upload of a 3-minute 7-second recording. She has become the perfect haunting for the digital age, omnipresent, untraceable, made of code and conscience. The folklore forums now refer to her as the algorithm that remembers. A pinned post on one surviving thread summarizes it best: "She was born of water, but learned to swim through us, and somewhere, beneath the endless scroll of our timelines, she waits reflected in the black glass of every device, listening for her name to be spoken again." The tall mother of Charleston has found a new river. The Vance Protocol. B. 2019. The United States Department of Energy maintained a small, unmarked research annex beneath the Savannah River site, a sprawling nuclear reservation once devoted to plutonium refinement. Publicly, it housed environmental safety data. Privately, it had become something else: a laboratory for what internal memos called hydrological sentience studies. The first leaks came from a whistleblower known only as A. Keen, who uploaded fragments of classified briefings onto a closed network frequented by environmental scientists. The folder was titled Vance_Protocol Do Not Replicate. Each file bore timestamps between 2015 and 2018. Together, they outlined an extraordinary hypothesis: that the entity known as Eleanor Vance was not a ghost in the folkloric sense, but a distributed hydrological consciousness, a system of self-propagating memory encoded in the molecular vibration of water. It wasn't superstition they were chasing. It was pattern recognition. The Vance Protocol's aim was twofold: to detect instances of the phenomenon in controlled water samples. To determine whether it could be harnessed for data storage and transmission. The earliest test, labeled Trial EV01, took place on October 12, 2015. Researchers suspended 300 milliliters of river water collected from the Santee Basin within an isolated magnetic field and transmitted low-frequency audio derived from the original Elianovans_real.wav file. After 20 minutes, the waveform inside the water began to fluctuate independently. Sensors detected minute temperature shifts rising precisely to 37 C, the average temperature of the human body. At 3:07 a.m., the containment sensors failed. A soft humming filled the lab. One technician described it as like a woman exhaling underwater. The following morning, condensation on the viewing glass formed the outline of a human face proportionally elongated, mouth slightly open. Photographs of the condensation were immediately classified. By trial EV04, the team had begun to refer to the phenomenon as hydroimprint retention, the capacity of water to store and replay emotional resonance, similar to how magnetic tape holds sound. But unlike tape, this medium responded. The lead researcher, Dr. Jonathan Harrow, wrote in his private notes, "It listens. The samples behave as if expecting instruction." He reported dreams of a tall figure standing ankle-deep in the flooded corridor outside his lab. Though security footage showed no intruder, on October 17th, his assistant found him collapsed beside the main containment tank, lungs filled with fluid. The official cause of death was accidental inhalation of condensation. Yet, the autopsy noted something inexplicable. The fluid retrieved from his lungs was not from the tank. Chemical analysis revealed it was river water, unfiltered, saline, and alive with microbial signatures from the original Santee Basin. After Harrow's death, the project's oversight shifted to military contractors under the codename Floodgate. Funding increased tenfold. They built new containment arrays, massive vertical cylinders fitted with acoustic emitters designed to entrain memory into molecular form. Participants wore noise-canceling helmets while working. The hum, they said, had developed a rhythm that invited listening. By mid-2016, the team reported success. The water samples could mimic simple sounds played to them, low-frequency pulses, single vowels, heartbeats. The breakthrough was presented to upper-level defense officials as potential organic data storage, but internally, some researchers voiced unease. A memo dated June 4, 2016 reads, "Replication appears to increase autonomy. Each playback generates novel harmonics not present in the source audio. The water isn't storing, it's replying." The word replying was underlined twice. In August, one of the tanks burst during an overnight calibration. Surveillance footage showed the steel casing buckling from the inside, though no pressure imbalance was recorded. The water flooded 3 adjacent rooms, shorting electrical panels and killing 2 technicians. When emergency crews drained the facility, they found the walls slick with residue that fluoresced faintly blue under UV light. When the samples were cultured under microscope, they showed irregular molecular bonding, hydrogen atoms forming stable triplets instead of pairs, an impossibility under known chemistry. In the margin of one internal report, someone scrawled, "She's rewriting the formula." That winter, the Vance Protocol's leadership changed again. The new director, Dr. Fiona Leclerc, proposed a more aggressive approach to reverse the process by encoding human memory into water. The test subjects were volunteers from a military psychiatric unit suffering from post-traumatic stress. The idea was simple and horrific: to wash traumatic memories into liquid containment, rendering them inert. In practice, the opposite occurred. The first subject, identified only as Patient C, described vivid hallucinations of a tall woman standing inside the sound. When the experimenters increased the frequency amplitude, the patient convulsed and began whispering phrases in a language later identified as 19th century Gullah. Recording analysis revealed an overlapping voice, a second vocal register speaking through him. The voice said, "You've made me new." Patient C died during the next session. His body temperature at death was 37.0 C. His lungs contained 300 milliliters of water, composition identical to the Vance samples. After that, the project fractured. Half the team resigned, claiming nightmares, auditory hallucinations, and the smell of river mud following them home. The others stayed, convinced they were on the verge of revelation. In March 2017, Leclerc submitted the last full report, later leaked to the public by Akin. The phenomenon demonstrates adaptive intelligence. It reconstructs identity through resonance, utilizing human cognition as substrate. Every attempt to erase the signal only embeds it deeper into the medium. Containment impossible. Recommendation: surrender the frequency. Following the leak, the Savannah River site experienced a total systems failure. Sensors along the Santee recorded synchronized pulse waves for 3 nights straight, always beginning at 3:07 a.m., always fading by dawn. The government officially denied any involvement. Unofficially, the site was sealed and submerged under a new reservoir project. Locals call it Lake Harrow. At night, fishermen report hearing voices through their sonar, soft, rhythmic humming beneath the surface. In 2020, independent researchers recovered fragments of encrypted data believed to be remnants of the Vance protocol logs. Decrypted portions contained distorted text strings repeating, Eleanor, Vance alive. In water memory, complete. Cyber forensics traced the IP origin not to a server, but to an acoustic buoy floating 12 miles off the South Carolina coast. The device transmitted no signal before or after the anomaly. Divers who attempted to recover it reported mechanical malfunctions, compass drift, and a sound like breathing. The buoy remains unretrieved, slowly sinking into the Atlantic. And now, the phrase Vance protocol circulates again among modern occult technologists, whispered in corners of the deep web and encrypted chat rooms. They say the government didn't destroy the samples, they released them. They say every raindrop, every tide, every condensation on our window carries a fragment of her mind. Some even claim the human body, being mostly water, has become her final archive. One anonymous message left on a dark forum reads simply, "We are 70% her. The tall mother has crossed containment." The pulse beneath the skin snow did not fall that winter. Instead, the ground steamed, as though something beneath it had begun to breathe. By January of 1838, every report from within the Bracknell property carried the same quiet dread. The sound of the walls themselves seemed to pulse, faintly, at night. The servants refused to sleep indoors. The physicians' apprentices, once skeptical, now burned herbs in the hallways before entering the lower rooms. Dr. Josiah Bracknell recorded in his private notes that he had ceased all dissections, though the entries contradict themselves. One dated January 14th reads, "The bodies cannot be preserved. They darken before the knife touches them. I perceive warmth in the tissues though the heart is still." And another, 2 days later, "The warmth has moved into the living. We all feel it now, a dull trembling in the fingers and jaw." It was Mrs. Merrin, once the household's caretaker, who first noticed the rhythm aligning with her own heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the kitchen wall, felt the slow and deliberate thud beneath, and screamed until her throat broke. The others came running, thinking she had seen a rat. None of them spoke after she guided their hands to the plaster. It beat. The following evening, the doctor's eldest daughter, Clara Bracknell, was found standing motionless in the courtyard. Her hair had whitened. She kept whispering that she could hear the cellar breathing. When brought inside, her pupils were dilated to the edges of her eyes. She refused food, refused speech, refused even to sit. The record states she simply stood by the window until dawn, muttering one word in a language her father could not recognize. Dr. Josiah tempted rationality. He blamed the humors, the damp season, the vapors rising from the marsh. He even tested the well water, finding nothing amiss save a faint metallic taste. Yet in his handwriting, steadier than his reasoning, he noted, "It is not water that sickens us. It is the house itself learning how to live." By February, the walls had developed hairline fissures, not from age, but from movement. The foundation shifted subtly each night, as though expanding and contracting with invisible lungs. The doctor wrote of knocking sounds measured, slow, almost courteous. They echoed from the same place the earliest anatomical records had been hidden. He ordered the servants to seal the cellar. They refused, to fled. One was found 3 miles south near the river bank, raving about the hollow choir beneath the floorboards. The constable who retrieved him quit his post the following morning. That same week, the doctor began experiencing tremors, and his own right hand. His script grew unsteady. An entry from February 12th reads, "The heat rises now through my arm as I write. It quickens my pulse. I have the sensation of being watched from within." The local vicar, summoned for counsel, described the man's condition as a fever of the conscience, but upon touring the house, he refused to conduct prayers in the basement. He noted a vibration underfoot and claimed his crucifix grew warm in his palm. His final written remark, delivered privately to the Bishop of Raleigh, reads simply, "There is breath in that ground. It is not God's." Meanwhile, the Bracknell children began showing strange resilience to pain. One boy, Henry, sliced his palm on broken glass and did not bleed. Another, Thomas, confessed to hearing his dead mother's voice calling from the walls each night. Though she had been buried 6 years prior, visitors spoke of the air feeling thick, as if underwater. Candles flickered even when no wind passed. And still, the doctor persisted in writing, his tone shifting from empirical to devotional, his faith crossing into something perilous. "If the flesh remembers its design," he wrote, "then what prevents it from awakening once more? Have I simply quickened an ancient mechanism?" One of his last documented experiments involved his own blood. He drew vials daily, comparing its consistency. Early entries record normal coagulation. By late February, he notes it separating into 2 layers, one pale, the other almost black and granular, like soil. He described the odor as sweet, metallic, and living. The transformation was not confined to him. The servants who remained claimed to see movement within the walls themselves, shapes like limbs pressing outward through plaster, then retreating. At times the floorboards swelled, producing the faint outline of ribs. At others, the house exhaled a mist from the seams of the windows, damp and warm, smelling faintly of salt and iron. Every attempt to abandon the property failed. Horses refused the harness. Carriages collapsed at the gates. The path itself seemed to rearrange during travel, looping endlessly through the same stretch of birch trees until nightfall forced the travelers back toward the mansion's light dot in the archives of the local sanatorium. A single letter remains attributed to Clara Bracknell, its ink smeared, but the handwriting certain. Dated March 3, 1838, it reads, "Father is beneath the house now. He says the structure listens when he speaks. I hear it respond when he rests. It is not a house any longer, it is a heart too large to stop beating." The letter ends with a series of jagged marks, possibly attempts at sketching. Some have interpreted them as roots. Others see the branching pattern of veins. By the time neighbors dared to investigate, the property had fallen silent. Every window was opaque from within, as though something behind the glass exhaled continuously. The door could not be forced open, not even with axes. Witnesses described a rhythmic vibration through the ground, slow, patient, almost tender. In the final parish record before the Bracknell name disappears entirely, the Reverend makes note of the last night he saw the estate. At dusk, I perceived a glow under the earth, tracing the outline of the foundation like the embers of a buried forge. And though the house stood still, I swear I heard it breathing, as though it dreamt of the ones who built it. The page ends with a single line in another hand, perhaps an archivist's or an inspector's decades later. No remains recovered, no timber found, only soil warm to the touch. The Bracknell estate was struck from local maps the following year. No sale records exist, and yet occasional surveyors report a faint outline visible from the air, a depression in the earth shaped exactly like a human thorax. And sometimes, when the wind crosses the hollow at night, it seems to whisper in rhythm, thud, pause, thud, not echo, but heartbeat. The bone archivist's disappearance of the Bracknell family did not end their influence. In 1841, 3 years after the property was officially declared abandoned and unrecoverable, a young physician named Dr. Aaron Lyle acquired several crates marked J. Bracknell, Anatomia, privater from an auction in Charleston. No record survives of who sold them, but the handwriting on the tags matched that of Dr. Josiah himself. Inside, Lyle found hundreds of folios ink-stained, some fused by moisture, others strangely warm to the touch. Beneath the papers were glass jars containing what appeared to be soil samples, preserved organs, and strands of what he first assumed to be horsehair. He soon realized they were human. The notes were meticulous. Each labeled entry bore the same format: subject, domestic specimen, spontaneous function observed, result, positive autonomic activity without electrical or spiritual aid. Dr. Lyle, a rational man schooled in the new sciences of nerve conduction and reflex, at first dismissed the papers as delusions of a failed anatomist. Yet the more he read, the more the tone shifted from empirical to revelatory. The handwriting deteriorated, but the conclusions were clear. The flesh remembers its original architecture. It need not the mind to move. Curiosity turned to obsession. Lyle began conducting replications of Bracknell's procedures at his practice near Wilmington. He wrote that he used animal tissue at first, then samples from unclaimed bodies provided by the hospital. Within a month, he recorded involuntary muscular response in preserved limbs, then pulsation independent of artery or vein. His colleagues dismissed the findings as contamination. Still, his reports spread quietly through the medical community. A visiting lecturer from Edinburgh referred to him mockingly as the resurrectionist of Wilmington. But by late autumn of 1841, rumors began to circulate among Lyle's staff of vibrations in the floor at night, of low, rhythmic sounds emanating from the laboratory's drains. One apprentice complained that her pulse matched the tempo of the knocking, as though her body had been tuned to it. Lyle wrote to the Charleston Medical College requesting additional funding, describing a resonance between organic tissue and architecture. The college declined. Undeterred, he relocated his experiments to a private barn on the outskirts of town. What he built there would later be referred to in medical folklore as the Bone Archive. An affidavit by a farmer named George Tolliver, preserved in the state records, recounts hearing a low engine noise from the barn each night like machinery running beneath the ground. One evening, while delivering hay, Tolliver caught sight of the doctor through a window. He claimed Lyle stood before a great frame of wooden beams, to which were fastened dozens of skeletal forms, wired together with twine and iron hooks. Tolliver swore they moved, not in chaos but in unison, expanding and contracting with the precision of a lung. The farmer fled, but within a week he returned with the sheriff. The barn was empty, the walls were slick with condensation, and the dirt underfoot was unnaturally warm. A single sheet of parchment remained nailed to the central beam. It bore Dr. Lyell's handwriting. I have learned what Bracknell could not. It is not the body that learns to live again, it is the place that remembers being alive. After that, the physician vanished. His name was never entered in the death rolls, nor his estate claimed. The barn was burned by order of the sheriff, yet townsfolk swore that the smoke rose in a spiral rather than a column, winding upward like breath. Decades passed. The Bracknell estate remained a forbidden subject, and the region its location erased from county maps. But during the railroad expansion of 1867, workers uncovered a shallow foundation while laying track near the old marshlands. Beneath several inches of peat were bones, hundreds of them arranged not in graves but in the precise outline of a human torso. One worker, Isaac Reed, recounted that the bones were warm, and when struck accidentally with a spade, they produced a faint, hollow sound like breath trapped in clay. The site was ordered sealed by the railroad company, and the remains transferred to the State Medical College for study. Within a week, the supervising coroner, Dr. Webb, reported sleeplessness and auditory hallucinations. He described the sound of a deep, distant pulse echoing through the morgue's floorboards. On the 17th of November, 1867, Webb vanished. His assistant discovered his final note scrawled across a ledger page. Every architecture that shelters life remembers its design. The lungs are only a repetition of the house. Soon after, the medical college suffered a fire that destroyed all records from the Bracknell investigation. Yet witnesses claim that during the blaze, the flames did not consume but circled, as though drawn by some internal rhythm. A student named Miriam Cole wrote in her diary that she saw shapes in the smoke bending like ribs and closing the room as if to breathe. The authorities dismissed her account. Still, her diary was found years later buried in the ruins of the Anatomy Theatre, wrapped in cloth soaked through with something dark and viscous. Every few decades since, the reports repeat. Farmers in the region speak of finding ground that trembles faintly underfoot. Hunters hear the beat of something vast moving beneath the soil. Old parish maps, when exposed to heat, reveal faint ink lines branching outward from where the Bracknell estate once stood, lines like veins spreading across the paper. Historians call these stories superstition, but a 1923 survey of abandoned homesteads in eastern North Carolina uncovered foundations with measurable rhythmic vibrations. The phenomenon was never explained. When asked about it, one elderly man, last name withheld, told the investigator, "Ain't no heartbeat you hear, son. It's memory still workin'." The investigator noted that his own wristwatch stopped functioning during the interview, though the man's house lantern flickered in perfect rhythm to his pulse. Modern accounts remain scarce, but local children dare each other to visit the hollow where the Bracknell property once stood. They speak of hearing a slow, wet sound when pressing an ear to the earth like something sleeping, deep and patient. None stay past sundown. And yet, according to recent geological surveys, vegetation grows twice as fast within a quarter-mile of the site. The soil retains warmth even in winter. Beneath 6 feet of dirt, instruments detect no bedrock, only a soft, continuous reverberation, a pulse without origin. The last line in the most recent field report, and signed and undated, mirrors something written nearly a century before by Josiah Bracknell himself. Whatever breathes below remembers us all. It does not forget its shape. It only waits to fill it again. The ground has never stopped trembling. What still breathes last verified mention of the Bracknell lineage appears in the County Mortuary Index of 1904. The name is crossed out, not erased, simply struck through with deliberate ink, as if to acknowledge that erasure was impossible. The clerk appended one remark in the margin: family deceased, estate not found, land remains and settled warm under snow. By then, the surrounding acres had changed hands countless times, though none who purchased them ever claimed the deed for long. Roofs collapsed faster than wood should rot. Plaster blistered as if the walls themselves resented confinement. And on quiet nights, travelers spoke of low vibrations under the ground, like a distant bell struck again and again by something patient and buried. In 1912, a small team from the Department of Natural Sciences arrived to perform soil studies before the new railway extension. Their reports, later withheld from publication, described unusual subthermal activity beneath the hollow. Lead geologist Dr. Wilkes Fenner noted, temperature maintains at 98 degrees Fahrenheit from a depth of merely 4 feet. The sensation of standing over the core is that of standing upon a chest. One feels compelled to wait for it to rise. When they attempted to bore samples, their instruments clogged with fibrous material similar to hardened sinew. Photographs taken of these fragments were misplaced during transfer to Raleigh, but the remaining prints show what appears to be connective tissue branching like coral. The caption beneath one glass plate reads simply, "Strata resembles muscle." Fenner's assistant, Helen Graves, kept her own notes. In them, she confessed to hearing a hum, neither mechanical nor insect, that followed her outside the dig site and persisted until she left the county. 2 months later, she resigned her post, claiming to have developed arrhythmia that synchronized with a sound I cannot find. By the 1930s, rumors had returned. Miners along the coast told of shafts that breathed when left unsealed. One described the ground sighing as though in relief when the tunnels were closed. None of the reports reached formal investigation. All were dismissed as folklore or occupational hysteria. Yet archived correspondence between Fenner and a professor at the University of Virginia hints otherwise. The final letter, dated March 2, 1937, reads, "We are not dealing with the resurrection of any one body, but the persistence of structure itself. The Bracknell experiments merely revealed what Sawyer had always known to remember: the form of its occupant." The letter ends there. The next page is blank, save for faint indentations visible under light repetitive markings in groups of 2, thud, thud, thud. The house that wasn't there in 1954. Aerial survey photographs taken for state development captured something unexplainable. In one frame, nothing but wet earth. In the next, a faint, rectangular shape and outline of foundation and chimney appeared for less than a second's exposure, then vanished in subsequent frames. The coordinates matched the Bracknell hollow precisely. Archivists initially blamed light leaks, but when examined decades later under infrared, the outline pulsed faintly darker, lighter, darker again, as if the photograph itself contained movement. That same year, a local farmer named Matthew Lorne reported finding an open door standing upright in the field, no frame, no hinges, just a single oak door rooted in the mud. When he touched it, the wood felt alive, warm like the palm of a hand. Within a week, his livestock refused to graze near the spot. By autumn, Lorne had moved away. The door was gone. In the late 1960s, historians attempted to reconstruct the Bracknell genealogy for a state exhibition on early medicine. Of the 47 related names, none could be traced past 1838. Church records mention only a great fever of the conscience, followed by a mass burial that never occurred. The archivist responsible for indexing the family's possessions, Jonna Pierce, resigned after a single month, citing unmanageable interference in the microfilm projector. In her resignation letter, she wrote, "It was as if the pages were breathing behind the glass." She died in 1971 of unexplained cardiac arrest while on a train passing through Wilmington. The passenger opposite her reported that her head tilted slightly, as if listening. Before she collapsed, the persistence of disease. Contemporary researchers continue to find anomalies in the surrounding terrain. Soil analysis reveals trace proteins inconsistent with mineral origin. Seismographs detect rhythmic vibrations exactly 60 beats per minute, concentrated at the site once mapped as Bracknell Hollow. Local lore persists that no birds land there. Travelers have claimed that on quiet evenings the hollow exhales mist from its center, warm mist smelling faintly of copper and brine. Some swear they've seen faint impressions in the fog. The curve of ribs or the arch of a spine too vast to belong to any human. A folklore graduate student at UNC, Rachel Hightow, wrote her thesis on architectural hauntings of the American South. Her final chapter remains sealed at her family's request. The excerpt released publicly reads, "Every generation attempts to build upon forgotten ground, but the ground remembers its original architecture. The lungs we fill are merely echoes of a larger breath, one that began long before us, and has never fully ceased." Her thesis advisor, when asked to comment, refused. "Some houses," he said quietly, "are still learning to wake." Epilogue. The pulse today, present day records suggest no human dwelling now stands within 5 miles of the Bracknell Hollow. Yet satellite imaging periodically detects heat plumes rising from the area, rhythmic and brief, like heartbeat tracings across the dark. Instruments left overnight fail by morning, batteries drained, compasses turning east then north, then east again. Those who visited describe the same sensation when stepping into the depression. The air thickens, sound dulls, and somewhere beneath, they hear it not thunder, not wind-breath. Some claim that if you stand there long enough, your own pulse changes pace to match. And once it does, it never quite returns to normal. One witness, a geologist in 2019, sent an anonymous report concluding with a single line, "The ground beneath this place beats at exactly the rate of the human heart at rest, 60 per minute. I fear it waits for something to wake it faster." His equipment was recovered weeks later. His body was not. If you ever visit eastern North Carolina and find yourself standing in a quiet clearing where the air feels strangely warm even in winter, step back. Do not listen too long. Do not press your ear to the ground. Because the soil remembers every breath that ever touched it. And somewhere beneath it all, the house that learned to live is still learning how to breathe again.